This training is brought to you by NHS Tayside Children and Young People's occupational therapists, speech and language therapists and dietitians. It is suitable for parents, carers, teachers and other professionals interested in understanding and managing fussy eating difficulties. The aims of this session are to increase your awareness of how and why feeding difficulties may occur. We hope to explain to you how senses impact on our food choices and to reduce your worries around fussy eating difficulties you may be having. We also hope to increase your confidence in trying to make changes, and we will discuss tools that you could use at home and at school. Typically, children are born with a preference for sweeter tasting foods, for example breast milk, which is high in calories and easy to digest. Over time, they move through these 3 stages of feeding development. Stage 1 is a time of relatively easy acceptance if they are exposed to a wide variety of food tastes, textures and colours. At the end of the first year, they can recognise foods based on taste, smell, texture and the way it looks. Sensory sensitive infants may struggle at this stage with moving through different textures. In stage 2, children may begin to reject foods based on how it looks, and this usually peaks around 18 months. Foods that they previously accepted may be rejected on sight before they have even tasted it, and so begins the development of their disgust response. This is an important evolutionary stage which has helped us with survival. At this age and stage, children are developing mobility, and in order to avoid the risk of eating something harmful, they become more wary and selective in what they will put to their mouth. The later stage 3, which begins usually around age 8, during this stage, rejection is often based more on what the child thinks about the food. They may worry about food contamination, for example, different foods touching other foods, or foods looking different to what they are used to. At this stage, children may begin to be influenced by what others are doing, and this may encourage them to try something new. Positive role modelling and prompting good eating can be helpful, but we must be careful never to force or coerce children into eating new foods. So what do we consider to be fussy eating? Well, fussy eating is a normal part of child development, and while most children pass through this phase, some children will continue to have difficulty eating a range of foods or accepting new foods, and their food choices may be limited. This can be due to factors that are present from birth and can include having an illness at an early age, sensory oversensitivity, requiring a tube for feeding, neophobia, which is the fear of trying new foods, disgust, and sometimes other developmental factors such as developmental delay or premature birth. It is not caused by what parents have done or have not done, but what is within the parent and carer control is how we respond as adults when fussy eating difficulties arise. We know that fussy eating difficulties can have a wide impact on the child and the family around them. Many parents experience guilt and blame when they have a child with feeding difficulties. Feeding children is a very important task as a parent, and when this goes wrong, it is natural for parents to become anxious. This is especially the case if the parents have differing opinions or if the child will eat something for a relative that they won't eat at home. Well-meaning friends and family can compound the feeling of blame with statements such as, "You need to be firmer," or "They'll eat it at my house." Here are some examples you may be able to relate to. As you can see, this can be a very real problem for families and a source of stress for parents and children. In order to support children and their families, we must recognise that we all have differing views about food and what constitutes a healthy diet. We need to acknowledge that it happens every day and families often don't get a break from the stress that surrounds mealtimes. It has an impact on the wider family, siblings, relatives and even friends, and can place limitations and have an impact on the family's ability to socialise and enjoy everyday activities such as going for a treat. Conflicted advice from friends and families can be unhelpful and trivialise the problem. Statements just such as it is just their behaviour. We need to remember that some children are simply just not motivated by food, and eating is not at the top of their list of priorities. So why do children refuse foods? Well, we know that this issue is often down to multiple factors. We know that if a child struggled moving on with textures when weaning, or had bad experiences with choking or gagging, or perhaps lots of reflux, that this can have a negative impact and reduce their willingness to try new foods out of fear that the same experience might happen again. Children need to develop skills in chewing, and part of that process of moving on through textures helps to desensitize the mouth. The more they experience different textures, the more they get used to the complex textures and can continue to progress. However, if you have had poor experiences or are reluctant or avoidant of textures, then this progress can slow or stop. Parents understandably often react when they see their child gagging. However, gagging is a normal developmental phase when children are learning to eat solid food and is very different to choking. Young children's gag reflex is found towards the tip of their tongue, so it is common for this reflex to be triggered. It is important that parents recognise this so that they can remain calm and positive, so that the gag response doesn't become a negative experience. Bite and dissolve textures foods are good for practicing moving on to new textures as they melt in the mouth. Some children develop eating difficulties due to medical interventions or due to a prolonged period of being unwell around the weaning age, which has impacted on their experience of eating. For others, it can be simply filling up on too much fluid by drinking large cups of juice or having a big drink of milk before eating, which can result in the child being too full to want to eat or try new things. For most of us, food is an enjoyable part of our lives, but for some children who are fussy eaters, they do not have the same enjoyment or pleasure out of eating, and therefore they may not have the same motivation to expand their range. For children who are particularly sensitive or have difficulty processing sensory information, they will find mealtimes even more challenging. Take a look at the images of different foods that are on the screen. Which ones would you eat? Which ones would you avoid? Why would you be reluctant to try that food? Is it the way it looks, the smell, or are you worried about the texture and how it might feel in your mouth? We all have our own sensory preferences, particularly with food, and this influences what we will and won't try. As adults, we have control over what food we might serve, and therefore our preferences influence our children's opportunities and experiences of food. We will now consider the impact of all of the senses, starting with smell. The child may react to smelling the food as it is being prepared. For example, while cooking, the smell may reach other parts of the house, and the child may not be able to cope with this. The smell may put them off before they even see the food and can have a huge impact on their appetite. Shops and fast food outlets often use smell to entice customers in by pumping fresh smells outside their premises. Similarly, certain smells can evoke a disgust response, for example, fish. Sight. We make a lot of initial judgments about how a food might taste based on how it looks. We will compare how the food looks with our past experiences. There is some research around how food looks changing the way we perceive the taste. For example, how would you feel if you were given a green tomato sauce? Do you prefer a certain colour of food, such as apples? Would you have a red one or a green one? And which would taste sweeter? Touch. Once we have coped with the sight and smell of food, we then need to tolerate touching it with our hands and experiencing the texture in our mouths. We can make some judgments about how a food will feel just by looking at it. Children who have difficulties moving on to textures in weaning can struggle to process a range of textures later on as their mouth becomes more hypersensitive. Taste. Some children will be drawn towards strong flavours such as spicy or sour foods, and others will avoid this and prefer a diet of more bland, plain tastes. Often this is due to the fact that bland, beige-type foods such as crisps, chips, biscuits, etc. are more predictable in their shape, size and texture, and therefore their taste, whereas vegetables are often more unpredictable, each one different from the last. Generally, children will tend to dislike bitter tastes, for example broccoli or sprouts, as on a primal level bitter flavours were associated with toxicity. Therefore, trying to get a fussy eater to eat these kinds of foods may have limited success. Hearing. Some children may be sensitive to noise and can appear distracted by noises in their environment. They may find it difficult to cope in very noisy environments, such as the dinner hall at school. Other children focus better on eating if there is some auditory input, such as background music. It may be that this acts as a white noise effect, cancelling out other more distracting sounds. Balance or vestibular system. It is important that children have appropriate seating for their age and stage when eating. It allows them to concentrate their efforts on eating rather than the effort of keeping their balance or maintaining being upright. This may include providing an appropriate height chair so that their feet can reach the floor. And finally, proprioception. This is the sense that tells us where we are in space and where our body parts are in relation to each other. Receptors within our joints and muscles help us to determine how much force we need to complete activities and help us to adjust as necessary. It is constantly providing feedback about our body, and our brain sends messages back and forth to adjust movements where necessary. When eating, children are using this sense to figure out where their mouth is in relation to the food or the cutlery, to use the right amount of force or pressure. Poorly developed proprioception may lead to messy meal times, food missing the mouth, and drinks getting spilt. A question parents often ask is why do children prefer certain brands or a dry, beige food diet over eating vegetables? Most of us, when faced with a food we've never seen or tried before, would be wary about what it might feel or taste like. We would look at it carefully, smell it, maybe touch it, before picking it up and bringing it to our mouths. We might watch and see if others are eating it. We learn from them and their reactions, and if we see someone enjoying food, then we are more likely to feel safer about trying it ourselves. Children are the same, and they all go through a neophobic stage as toddlers where they fear the different. At this stage, toddlers are focused on the specific details rather than the wider picture, and they compare this with an internal image of what the food should look like. For example, a biscuit is a round and solid shape. The biscuit on the right is not a biscuit because it does not match the internal knowledge of what a biscuit should be. This is the same reason children at this stage often prefer packaged foods, as how it looks on the outside helps us to tell if it is safe to eat or not. For some children, apples always have to be red, as this is what they have come to experience most often, and they therefore know as a safe food. One of the big difficulties we hear parents question is why their child will eat crisps or chips or biscuits and not any vegetables. Part of this may be to do with the potential for bitter tasting fruit or veg, but also because the likelihood of vegetables looking slightly different each time, for example a different colour, shape or size, even slightly, means that the child will be more anxious when trying them in case they taste different. It is far safer to stick with the predictable foods, which are the same each time they are given, and the reason why children may be upset even these foods change in appearance. For example, the chips are slightly overcooked or browner than usual, or the biscuit is broken. Toddlers typically move on from this stage as they begin to copy others and imitate their eating habits. Some children, however, find it difficult to imitate others and make food generalizations, and their fear of new foods continues beyond these years. This is particularly true if they are sensory sensitive children because they are more likely to be hypervigilant to the smaller details of food and have greater difficulty generalizing. We will now briefly consider healthy eating and what a varied diet might look like. I'm sure some of you may be familiar with the Eat Well guide already. If your child eats one or two foods from each of the four main groups, then they are likely to be getting all of the protein, energy, vitamins and minerals they require to grow well and to be healthy, depending on the foods they choose and their portion size. Let's look at each group in a little more detail. The green section is our fruit and vegetables, and they provide a healthy source of vitamins and fibre. I'm sure we have all heard the healthy message of aiming for 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. These can be fresh, dried, tinned in juice, or tinned in fruit juice. Vegetables can be fresh, frozen, and can include things like soup and homemade tomato sauce. When thinking about your child's preferences, think about how the vegetables or fruit look, taste, and perhaps the texture, as these can vary significantly. The yellow section is our whole grain and starchy carbohydrates. It includes potatoes, breads, pasta, etc. And this provides a source of calories, some protein, vitamins, minerals, and fibre. The choice for children often depends on the texture. Some find that mashed potatoes are too wet, but prefer the crunchy crisps or chips. Pasta may be slimy, but they may prefer things like cornflakes. Fortified cereals are a good source of vitamins and minerals, including iron. The blue section is our milk, dairy, and non-dairy alternatives, and these provide a source of calcium, protein, and calories. It includes cheese, yogurt, fromage frais, and non-dairy alternatives such as soya and nut milks. Some of these may have a distinctive taste, and for fussy eaters we would include things like custard and rice pudding in this group, as they contain a good quantity of milk. The pink section is our meat, fish, eggs, and non-animal protein sources, such as nuts, peas, beans, lentils, corn, and tofu. These provide our protein and iron. Some children find the smell of these foods off-putting as well as the texture, and they may therefore eat a limited range. The final external section includes crisps, biscuits, sweets, etc. These provide a source of calories, but they are on the outside as they are not in preference to the foods from the 4 main food groups. Depending on which foods your child does not like, a vitamin or mineral supplement might help. Sometimes it can be difficult to find one that your child will accept, but you can always seek further advice from our dietitian colleagues. How much your child should be eating is often a source of stress for many families. Over the last few years, the size of an average portion has gotten much bigger, bigger than probably most of us actually need. Too much food or too big a portion on a plate can be very off-putting for children, and it may be more helpful to use smaller plates to reduce the amount of food, as you can always give more once they have finished if they would like it. Children these days come in all shapes and sizes with a wide range of heights and weights, so there is no one-size-fits-all portion size that meets all children's needs. It's helpful to remember to consider the size of their hand, and a starchy carbohydrate portion would be a fistful, meat or alternatives would be a palm of their hand, and fruit or vegetables would be a handful. Remember, it is their hand size, not yours. The amount of food that a child will eat often varies widely from day to day, meal to meal, as children tend to average their calorie content over a week, while adults do this daily. You may therefore find that children have days where they hardly eat anything and other days where they take on a lot of food. Where do children eat? Getting the environment and seating right helps children to feel safe and secure, and their willingness to try new things might improve. If children feel safe within their environment, they will be more calm and accepting of new things. Think about where your child has his or her meals and snacks at home. Where do they eat better and why? For some children, sitting with others can be enjoyable and they can demonstrate good modelling of enjoying food, whilst for others, the impact of seeing noisy, messy eating or food in the mouth of others might be more off-putting. As we have mentioned before, background noises such as TVs and iPads can distract many children from eating, whilst for others these can be helpful, as some children eat more whilst distracted. Smell can have a huge impact on a child's desire to eat, as it can stimulate hunger for some, but for others the smell of cooking food can be so overwhelming it creates a disgust response before the food is even seen, and the child may therefore choose to eat in a different room or refuse to eat altogether. It is not unusual for children to respond differently in different settings for a variety of reasons. For example, they may eat more at Granny's house or at school, and we may benefit from considering the sensory factors influencing their eating behaviours in different environments. It is also important to consider the seat your child is sitting in. Choose a seat which is developmentally appropriate for your child and provides an adequate level of support. Children should be able to keep their feet flat on the floor or on a footrest. Consider if they are able to maintain their balance, or do they require a seat which can provide more support. Perhaps a box or stool under their chair so they can reach it with their feet will help them feel a little bit more secure. Try to create regular routines around meals and snacks, ensuring that there is a reasonable time between meals to let your child begin to feel hungry. Discourage grazing of food and fluids, as this can fill them up and reduce their willingness to eat more at mealtimes. Depending on your day-to-day routine and sleep routine, typical advice is for 3 set meals and 2 snacks. However, this can vary. For example, if your child has a long sleep in the afternoon, they may not need a snack. Some parents find it helpful to use snack time as an opportunity to try new foods, as there is less pressure than at mealtimes. For mealtimes, try to work out when your child seems to be most hungry and offer them consistently each day. Limit mealtimes to 20 or 30 minutes. Mealtimes shouldn't go on, as this creates more stress for both the child and you. Remove the plate after 20 or 30 minutes, as it is quite unlikely that your child will eat much more after this length of time. Drinks should be provided in small cups or beakers at meals and snack times. Whilst it is absolutely necessary your child keeps hydrated, it is very easy to fill up on fluids. It is really important to keep mealtimes as happy and as stress-free for everyone as possible. Here are some tips to try. Encourage self-feeding to give your child some control. Recognise your child's cues. For example, when have they had enough and when are they seeking more? What do they do to show you? Think about how you respond to food. Children learn lots by watching others. Try to ignore negative behaviours as much as possible. Allow your child to serve themselves portions of food from dishes on the table, as this allows your child to decide how much they want and have some more control. Another tip is to try to have a separate tasting plate to keep the new food away from your child's plate and help build up their trust. Maybe having a plate of new food for the whole family to try. There are also some don'ts. Try not to keep changing the rules. Try not to say things such as just one more spoonful or just one more bite. Don't hide foods in foods that they would usually eat. This is likely to result in them seeing them and not eating the food that they would normally eat. It can also affect your trust. Don't react to negative behaviours. Try and be as neutral as possible throughout mealtimes, despite how stressed it might be feeling. Don't use food as a reward. For example, try not to say, "You can have your pudding if you finish your vegetables." This gives the impression that the pudding is better than vegetables, and we create good and bad foods. You could try using stickers instead, a trip to the park, or perhaps playing a family game. Ideas for moving on. Getting messy is a really important part of developing self-feeding and moving on through different textures. If you want to encourage eating of foods, you need to explore the textures. Think about how you feel about mess. Allowing mess can be difficult when you don't like it yourself, but always cleaning and wiping your child or the table can reinforce the idea that mess is bad, and it can increase your child's sensitivity. Ideally, getting messy and messy play should be part of weaning. For children who are particularly sensitive to textures, you will need to gradually work your way through the textures. Often starting with dry is easiest, for example, uncooked pasta or rice or oats or cereals. And then when your child is ready to move on to sticky textures such as dough. Then more wet liquid textures such as custard, before mixed textures such as pasta and sauce or beans. It is better to do messy play away from mealtimes and ideally using real foods. But if your child gets messy during mealtimes, try to wait until the end before cleaning him or her. Some messy play activities you can try at home. Playing with toys in food. Sometimes this can help reduce sensitivity by using figures or animals to explore the texture. the child builds up trust, and the accidental touches of the food can help build up their tolerance. Make sure you give lots of reassurance and praise throughout. The tips of the fingers and the palms are the most sensitive, so grade the activity by allowing them to explore in other ways, such as using the back of their hand or arm, which is less sensitive to touch. Pretend tea parties are great for role modelling. You can also get messy by using food to make pictures or other craft ideas. And get your child involved in baking and cooking where appropriate. Children are much more likely to eat something they have helped to prepare or touched in advance. Introducing new foods will take time, and it is important to try and stay positive as you go. Decide on one thing that you as a family want to work on at a time and stick with that until it is achieved before introducing another something else to work on. It will take lots of practice over a long period of time to expand their range of accepted foods, so try to be realistic about your expectations. For some, food is not a motivator, and therefore it can feel like an uphill battle. It is often easiest to expand around the foods which are currently accepted. When introducing a new food, choose a food that is similar to what your child already eats. For example, if your child only eats bland, crunchy foods, then choose something with a similar taste and texture, maybe from crackers to breadsticks. Try to get your child involved in choosing what they would like to try next. Start with only a tiny amount. Pea-sized is usually enough and is less threatening than larger volumes. Rather than putting the new food on your child's own plate, a tasting plate can be less intimidating, as it allows them to build up the experience of the sight and smell of the food without the pressure to eat it. As we have mentioned before, trying new foods away from mealtimes can offer an opportunity to experience the food in a positive, no-stress way, and regular play sessions without expectations to eat can be far more enjoyable for everyone. Older children may enjoy food-related challenges, such as taste scoring or creating collages of pictures of the preferred foods and foods they may try. The idea ultimately is to increase the exposure to foods by a maximum exposure, minimum pressure. Some children benefit from some desensitization activities prior to trying new foods or prior to mealtimes. This might include simple relaxation activities such as mindfulness or guided relaxation stories, deep pressure activities such as proprioceptive, heavy work, massage or pushing and pulling activities, or your speech and language therapist may recommend some desensitization activities around the mouth. For example, massage, which includes firm stroking movements towards the mouth, keeping movement symmetrical, perhaps massage around the face and lips to increase acceptance of touch and reduce hypersensitivity within the mouth, and this may include using electric toothbrushes or oral sweeps. The idea is to increase the amount of oral experience and exploration to achieve better tongue, lip, jaw movement for feeding and also for speech, and overall increase their oral experiences. We recognise that knowing where to start when it comes to feeding difficulties can feel overwhelming, so creating a table like this can be helpful to consider the different stages of accepting foods. You can use this to record what foods your child will eat and what they definitely won't, but you can also consider what foods they might tolerate seeing, touching, smelling, bringing to their mouths, or even biting, as these are all important steps. Sometimes when we are experiencing difficulties, it can be difficult to see any progress, but tables like this can be useful to look back on in a month or 3 months' time and see what progress has been made. Another table that can be useful is this, which considers an action plan of what your child is going to do next. Depending on their age and stage, you can do this goal-setting activity with your child or consider it a tool for yourself as a family to identify what your next steps or goals might be. Remember to choose one thing at a time and keep reminding yourself that it can take time to make small changes. Being consistent is key. We'd like to leave you with these main messages to consider following today's training. Choose a good time for your family to try and make any changes when there aren't other pressures or stresses occurring. Consider the environment and what you are expecting your child to eat at each meal. Remember maximum exposure to foods with minimum pressure to eat them. Remind children that you don't have to eat them, and place things on tasting plates for them to try. Try to just change one thing at a time and choose foods that have got a similar appearance or texture to those that are being accepted already. Be aware of the impact of all of the senses and consider these when you're having difficulties. Remember, messy play is important and can help children to develop tolerance to lots of different textures. Here are some websites you may find useful. Some have short videos you can watch, and others have useful handouts to help you understand and support your children who are fussy eaters. If you would like to know more about general sensory processing difficulties, the Occupational Therapy Service are currently offering parents and carers the opportunity to attend our parent workshop, Daily Occupations and Sensory Processing. You can find further details about booking onto this through our website or through our Facebook page. There is also a recorded version of this training on our YouTube channel. You can find out further information about both occupational therapy and speech and language therapy for children and young people on our Facebook pages and websites highlighted on this slide. You can find out more about the role of dietitians and how to contact them by going on to our NHS Tayside webpage. The address is shown here, and you can search for our services, AHPs, nutritions and dietetics. Doctors or other health and social care professionals may be able to refer individuals to address specific medical or health needs or conditions. If you are concerned about your child's weight, the Paediatric Overweight Service also accepts referrals from parents or carers, and you can telephone or email the details shown. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch with any of the services discussed. Thank you for listening, and we hope this training has been helpful.